All right, well, welcome to the August 2023 Collaboration Cafe webinar, sponsored by the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub with support from the National Science Foundation. I'm John MacMullen, Executive Director of the MBDH, and today we'll be exploring an NIH research grant opportunity that's focused on biomedical informatics and data science. So this program is led from the National Library of Medicine, which is one of the 27 institutes and centers at NIH. And NLM actually has a long history of funding innovative informatics programs, both externally through funding opportunities like the one we'll look at today, but also through staff researchers on the campus as well. NIH now also has an agency-wide Office of Data Science Strategy. And so there are multiple perspectives at the institution on data science and how that relates to biomedical research. And so to help us understand what this program that we're looking at today is trying to do by bringing together informatics and data science, I'm very happy to welcome to the call a program director with responsibility for this opportunity, Dr. Allison Dennis. So thank you for being here today. Dr. Dennis has worked at NIH as a researcher, as a program manager, and currently as a program officer with responsibility for this particular solicitation. She has also been a AAAS fellow and has worked in both the Office of Data Science Strategy and at the National Library of Medicine. So she, I think, is in a great position to help us explore this opportunity today and get a sense of what NIH is trying to do with this program. Before I hand it off to her to get the discussion started, I'll mention that the slides for today's session will be available on our website shortly after the webinar, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. The plan for today is to give you a very brief summary of the program, but really reserve most of the time to talk with our guest and to talk with you in the audience about your questions that you have, and particularly about opportunities that you see for potential collaborations in this area. This is a very highly multidisciplinary area of science, and so we're interested to have a mixture of folks on the call from different academic backgrounds and other research interests. And so we look forward to a good discussion today with you all. For those of you who are on the call today who are new to the Hub community, I'll just take a moment to tell you who we are and what we do. So we are part of a national network of 4 hubs, regionally distributed and funded by NSF. And we're all focused on building communities and collaborations around data science across the country through events like this and through other programs that we each have. If you're joining today or watching the recording today from outside of our 12-state Midwest region here, I do encourage you to reach out to the Hub within your geographic region to look for opportunities to get involved in their activities and get connected to their network. All right, so at this point, I will stop sharing and I'll turn it over to Dr. Dennis to give us some context about the program that we're looking at today and other data science issues at NIH. So go right ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. I can actually probably skip this first slide, but again, I'm a program officer with the Department of Extramural Programs within the National Library of Medicine at NIH. And I did come to this position from being at the Office of Data Science Strategy formerly. So I think I can probably field a few questions about that if people are generally interested. But the focus of my talk today is really on the National Library of Medicine and our interests in extramural research. So we in NLM offer grants for research projects and research training. We also have some resource development grants that we give out I'm not going to talk about today, but just for additional context. We look to fund research into biomedical informatics and data science. And For us, this research applies computer and information sciences to improve the access, storage, retrieval, management, dissemination, and use of biomedical information. So this is a pretty broad charge. At NIH, we're a disease agnostic institute, so we are very much interested in how information flows and how that information gets used for improving research, how it improves patient care, a very wide spectrum. So the NLM has a guiding strategic plan, and as part of that strategic plan, we have three major goals. The first is to accelerate discovery and advance health through data-driven research. So most of my efforts as a program officer fall under this first goal. We also have the charge to reach more people in more ways through enhanced dissemination and engagement. Part of NLM is the National Library of Medicine that runs PubMed. It runs a tremendous suite of resources through the NCBI. So they're really looking at computation and bringing computational resources to librarians, to researchers all across the country. And thirdly, our goal is to build a workforce for data-driven research in health. And as part of that, we do fund quite a few training programs. So please look at our website if you're more interested in training opportunities. So we think about this spectrum of data science and informatics along these 6 different scientific areas. These are not perfect definitions, and they're ones that we struggle with, but these are kind of the categories that we use to organize our thinking about research in this space. So for us, the data science that we are most interested in is information, methods that help innovate the collection, classification, a lot of AI that looks at how to, best disseminate data, gain information and knowledge related to health and biomedicine from a wide range of data. In bioinformatics, we're looking at, how do you use data science specifically to pull out all that understandable and useful information specifically from life sciences data. Next, we have translational bioinformatics. So this is when something is moving away just from, the life sciences data, and how do you translate that into something that's going to impact a patient in the clinic. We have purely clinical informatics. So this is applying biomedical informatics through patient care in the patient care domain to assist in management and processing of clinical data, information, and knowledge to support clinical practice. We have public health informatics. So this is how do you, use informatics and computer science to help people in public health practice, research, and learning so that they can better surveil disease outbreaks, for example, prediction of epidemics, reporting and health promotion, and then personal health informatics that I'm also the program officer for, in which we develop methods and approaches that support the engagement of consumers and patients in understanding and using health data and information. So I keep this organized in my head, kind of on this spectrum, and I hope those in this audience, can kind of figure out where their research fits in. So we think about this on a continuum from basic to applied research, with data science kind of up here in the top. In the basic, we do fund basic data science research. So this could be, natural language processing methodology, it could be AI methodology that is very, basic in its development. And then that moves down in sophistication and application through bioinformatics to translational bioinformatics, as I described. And we also think of this on a continuum from, data that is focused on molecular and cellular processes all the way up through, patients and individuals, institutions, and populations, depending on what exact flavor of informatics we're talking about. But all of these are within purview of the funding opportunity that we're going to be discussing today. I am the program officer for bioinformatics, translational bioinformatics, and personal health informatics. But I do have coverage across all of these different categories. And, if you reach out to me and you're interested after this presentation, I can put you in contact with a program officer that could speak to you more specifically about any one of these areas. Okay, this is a dense slide, and I put it together because I want you to have all of this information. This is a listing of all of the current research funding opportunities that we have open. At the top of this list is the one we'll be discussing today, research grants in biomedical informatics and data sciences. So we'll be walking through, what is really the purview of this funding opportunity. But I will say that the complement to this R01 opportunity that comes through NLM directly would be this investigator initiated research grants R01 program. So if you find that after today, this first funding opportunity doesn't meet your needs, you can always come in with your own investigator initiated application through this parent funding opportunity. There's an NIH wide opportunity, and that will still come to NLM. I also wanted to highlight that we have an opportunity on computational approaches to curation at scale for biomedical research assets that I think could be of interest to this audience. We recently published this personal health informatics for delivering actionable insights to individuals, which is a recent opportunity that we just opened. We have special opportunities for early stage investigators. I will say, across all of these opportunities, early stage investigators are a special group in NIH's eyes. And so applicants from earlier in their careers are given special considerations when we're making funding decisions. So please be in contact if you are looking for your first R01. That's a special group of people, and we want to make sure that you have access to the right information as you open the door to funding. We also fund R21s, which are smaller in scale and scope than an R01, and are typically, supposed to be feasibility testing for very high risk, high reward, short-term projects. Okay, I mentioned that we also have opportunities in career development and small business support, depending on, what you are looking for in your research. We also have the K99 ROO. So this is typically for postdocs and people who are still in a training stage of their career to support their transition to independent investigator. We support fellowships at the graduate student and postdoc level. We also have supplements to our existing programs that anybody that wants to add personnel or students from specific classes who are interested in having additional funds to support their grants can seek that support. For small businesses, I also am the program officer that oversees small business opportunities. So we have the Small Business Innovation Research Program, SBIR, and Small Business Tech Transfer, STTR. So both of these provide support for small businesses who are looking to undertake research that will lead to commercialization. And both of these require STTR requires a partnership with a nonprofit research institution. Okay, so for additional information, if you want more information after this presentation today, I encourage you to go to the NLM Extramural Program website. That's this first bullet. If you're interested in seeing more about what NLM invests in this space, there's a full listing of our current actively funded projects on Reporter. And if anybody wants to reach out to me to talk about the scope of an idea and how it aligns to this funding opportunity that we're going to discuss further, I'd be happy to answer your questions and perhaps review a specific aims page if you put that together for me to take a look. So I guess with that, I will turn it back over to John and we can dive right into this funding opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If audience members have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat at any point. But if you have specific follow-ups that you'd like to ask our guest right now, feel free to put those in or unmute as well. I think I'll ask you a quick question. Earlier this year, we had a couple of program officers from NHGRI on to talk about a R25 training grant program that they had that was focused on data science and genomics. And so, there's a number of those different kinds of things across the institutes based upon their relevance to their mission. And so you had mentioned sort of some of the individual fellowship opportunities at NLM, for example. Do you all have larger scale training grants like an R25 that might be relevant to data science as well?
Yes, so we actively have a T15 program and an R25 program that looks specifically at enhancing diversity in data science. That's the R25, and it provides, short-term research opportunities. The T15, these are very large scale training consortia grants. The T15 is renewed every 5 years, and I think it's in year 4 currently. So I didn't include it because we have lots of trainees who are being actively trained, but it's not something that you could apply to. We do, of course, expect that both the T15 and R15 programs will be renewed, but I can't speak to that until it happens. So those are both very active and successful programs, but there is no opportunity that's open currently.
Great. We can check those out if folks are interested in those. I mean, those are, in terms of mechanisms, those are longstanding programs that NIH and NLM have had for decades now at this point. And so it's great to see them being extended into the data science realm as well. I will go back and start sharing my screen again, but again, if audience members have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat and we will be on the lookout for those. All right, hopefully you can see my screen again. And like I said, we'll dive directly into some of the details here, but have a lot of time to answer your questions either about this particular solicitation or about other opportunities at NLM. In particular, the data science mission that NIH has. I think it would be interesting to explore that a little bit as well. But let's get started with this program. So Dr. Dennis mentioned that this is an R01 program, and so that means it's focused on research rather than training or practice, and it's a full-scale project rather than one of the smaller scale that she mentioned. This particular due date that we're looking at in this sort of cycle is October 5th, but as we'll talk about on the next slide, NIH has a variety of submission timelines that are very helpful to look at. So just in terms of scope, this is a program that allows up to a 4-year period for the performance of the work and up to $250,000 per year in direct costs. My understanding, Allison, is that indirect costs are not part of that budget line there. Is that right? So you have to account for that in your budget, but that is not counted in this particular number. So we'll get into on upcoming slides some of the details about what NLM is trying to do here. But up at the top, we just have a couple of bullets about the overall program goals. And so, I think the overview that we had a moment ago starts to approach some of the details here in terms of looking at this through the lens of basic research, but clinical care. How does this ultimately impact patient care and public health outcomes, things like that? In this case, they're looking at innovative methods and approaches to foster data-driven discovery. And so again, thinking about this through the lens of data science, data analytics approaches, other kinds of informatics dimensions here, as opposed to focusing on the underlying molecular biology, for example, or other science topics. Thinking about how to extend what you're doing beyond the immediate question that you're trying to answer, and is this something that could be used by other people after you have finished the work? Can you extend it to a different discipline, a different domain? Is it scalable from a small pilot up to a larger deployment? Is it something that other people can reuse for other kinds of functions? So really interesting to see that sort of broad spectrum and start to think about what might fit under that umbrella as we dig in here a bit. So in terms of mechanism here, letters of intent or pre-proposals are not required for this particular program, but there is a couple of mentions in the solicitation that proposers are encouraged to contact a program officer, and there are several of them listed at the bottom of the solicitation, for guidance about your concept, whether that is going to fit within what NLM is looking for here. In particular, clinical trials are allowed for this project. That's not always the case for data science programs, and certainly not always the case at NLM versus some of the other institutes. And so it's kind of a unique situation to be able to do a clinical trial here as well. But again, if you're interested in that, it's really important to reach out to a program officer to check in on what your scope of work looks like and whether it's relevant to this solicitation. And I'll just mention, you know, it can be scary for first-time proposers to reach out to a program officer. It can seem a little mysterious, or you know, maybe you're asking them to do something that is out of their job description. But really, in most of the federal agencies, they want to hear from proposers. They want to get proposals that are a good fit for their solicitations, and they're very willing to talk with you about your ideas. They may not give you exactly the answer that you want. They may give you some general guidance, but it's really important to take advantage of that opportunity to speak with them and see how your ideas align with the programs. They may be able to direct you to a different program that is much more relevant than the one that you started looking at. In terms of eligibility, this is open to really any PIs who are proposing work that is relevant and are qualified to do that. Other NIH solicitations have more stringent requirements, but this it's pretty open. And that also includes the institution types that are eligible here as well. So higher education, of course, but also nonprofits, for-profit organizations, government agencies, other types of organizations as well. And there are opportunities for non-US entities or non-US units of US entities. And so that is also somewhat unique for agencies to provide that funding as well. So think broadly, think creatively about who might be some partners that you could work with outside of academia, for example, that would help you address some of those program goals of getting towards public health goals and outcomes. If you have not proposed to NIH before, you do need to have an account in the ERA Commons system, and that can take a little time to set up. And in particular, if your institution is not already set up to receive NIH awards or to submit into those, that's really important to get that started as soon as possible. All right, let's talk a little more about timing, because if you're new to NIH solicitations, they frequently include this very helpful timeline of standard submission dates within the solicitation. And so that tells you that there's multiple dates that you could submit a proposal, but it also gives you some guidance about when the review process takes place and when you might expect an award if you are selected. And so in this example, we can see that if you are looking at the October 5th deadline this year, those proposals will get reviewed in March of next year. And so you want to be thinking about your start date being July 2024 or later when you're thinking about your timeline and your budget and things like that. Allison, I know that you can't commit this program indefinitely in the future. It all depends on Congress and appropriations and so forth. But is this a program that you think is going to continue beyond the October 5th deadline?
Yeah, so this one actually has, I have to find the line for it, but I think it has the expiration date of January 2026. So that is the commitment of the government through January of 2026. So that's a pretty good runway, but I will say that this is kind of our bread and butter funding opportunity. This is how we signal the community what we're interested in, and this is the bulk of the awards we make is through this funding opportunity. So I don't see it going away in the future.
So that's very helpful, because if you are interested in proposing to this program, but you don't think you're going to get there for October, you can have a look at the list here, and maybe February is a better opportunity for you, or next summer if you need to develop some collaborations or do some preliminary work that would strengthen your proposal. So really important to keep that in mind, but also to remember that it's going to take 9 or 10 months or more before you actually receive receive an award if you're selected on the first round. And so that may not happen either. Really, really good to have the strongest proposal you can on the time frame that works best for you. All right, so let's look a little bit more at some of the guidance in the opportunity on what the scope of this particular opportunity looks like. So, in the title, we have seen biomedical informatics, which is its own enormous area. We see data science, which again there's a ton of research happening there. So how is NIH and NLM in particular trying to scope this down into proposals that they're wanting to see in this round? So again, we have seen some of this earlier today, focusing on data-driven discovery. How do we make that faster? I wanted to ask Allison, in terms of some of the diagrams that you showed earlier, you had that sort of XY chart of the different flavors that you mentioned. And in the solicitation, we have the word exposome, which is sort of cutting across some of those dimensions in terms of looking at how external factors influence biology and health. And so do you have anything that you want to add about what that particular concept means in terms of this solicitation relative to what you had said earlier?
I think that, what I showed earlier is really, encompassing the full space. And I think here, exposome is called out because we're always trying to encourage researchers to think about how do you pull in data that hasn't traditionally been pulled into the health context before. And now we're seeing with all sorts of environmental sensors, with knowledge of climate change, these are going to be big health problems in the future, but also an opportunity to look at the ways the environment affects our health all the time, not just in the clinic. So the exposome is really about, not just the traditional healthcare setting, but all the different ways that our environment and our health history affects our health.
Absolutely. And there is some clarification here that we're talking about a range from how that impacts, things at the cellular level, but also, out to the built environment. So where people live, what kinds of things are in their environment that may affect their health. There certainly could be very interesting studies looking at real-time sensing networks around variables that affect health for sure. So again, think broadly when you're thinking about the kinds of projects that you might develop here, because you're given a lot of freedom, as we'll see more in a couple of slides here, in terms of that scope. But again, you can see in some of these other bullets that the focus really is here on the data science elements. There clearly are ties back to the basic biological sciences, but we're seeing a lot of language around developing analytics, developing NLP systems, for example, or maybe other AI kinds of approaches to decision making. How do we manage the large amount of knowledge that's being developed and different kinds of data, bringing those together, analyzing those in different ways. So really the data science elements are prominent here, but in the context of the health dimensions as well. Couple of limitations that we're starting to see already in terms of we don't want to take that too far. We're not funding our supercomputer or our hardware system. There has to be some kind of science objective, some kind of problem that you're addressing in the service of what you're developing. And so you want to be cautious about making sure that you're not putting things into your budget that are not allowed under this program. I'm not going to read through all of these points, but again, the idea is that the solicitation gives you a lot of guidance about the areas that NIH is interested in funding. And so they're giving you in this list here some of the specifics where they have a long history of funding and internal research, but giving you some good sense of the scope here. I would say if you're choosing a topic for your project that is outside of this enormous list, then it's really important that you talk with a program officer to make sure that what you're thinking about is going to align with this program, or maybe it's a better fit for a different program, because they're giving you a lot of leeway here in terms of what you might address with your project. And really we can see that from basic kinds of data science research. This is sort of a one-dimensional look at that two-dimensional graph that we saw earlier, where it's ranging from basic science to public health and health disparities, ethical issues, things like that, security. So there really is a huge range of possibilities within this list here. Let's talk a little bit about what you're expected to have in your proposal. So the research plan is the main narrative of your proposal. And if you're familiar with NSF, the NSF world, this is similar to the project description that you would have there. So data management and sharing is a really federal government-wide initiative to make sure that the data that are produced from federally funded research are available for other people to have access to. And so that's definitely part of the NIH mission as well. Research strategy is really the main intellectual merit section of your proposal. So looking at significance, what is the problem that you're trying to address? What is your proposal trying to tackle, and how would moving that area or filling that gap affect the science that you're addressing here? What's the novelty? What's the value that you would be adding if you were funded to do this project? And then the approach section is, how exactly are you going to do that? How are you going to solve the problem that you've identified? How are you going to investigate the hypothesis that you've said is important here? So providing evidence of related work that you've done, or citing other work that is prior to what you're talking about is important here. And we have some guidance from the solicitation that says this should be not only innovative, but scalable, generalizable, and provide a well-defined rationale to put this into practice. There is also a requirement for a resource sharing plan. And so this is distinct from the data management plan, but looking at disseminating resources that you're creating as a part of this product, that includes things like software code. So for example, if you're developing software for a particular purpose here, making that available to other people is important and is part of that resource sharing plan. Allison, I don't know if you want to address the differences for folks who may be new to NIH between data management plans in the NIH context and resource sharing plans, because there may be some confusion there about where one starts and the other stops.
Sure. So the data management and sharing plan is now NIH-wide. Any R01 funding opportunity is going to require a data management and sharing plan. So in the course of your research, if you are sequencing genomes, if you are collecting smartwatch data, anything like that, you should describe a plan for how you plan to share that information and make it available. That would involve thinking through the database that should be properly shared with so that it gets used by other researchers in the field. There's also, appropriate places where you might say this is sensitive information, so we're not going to share it. And that is allowable, but you need to clearly explain the limitations that you're placing on your own data sharing. And that is evaluated by program officers at the time of us making an award. We would look at that sharing plan and make sure that it's adequate against the NIH spirit of what we want to see for data sharing for these projects we're investing in. For the resource sharing plan, because the focus of this funding opportunity is so much on software development, on methodological approaches, anything that's going to result in a software package, we would really like to see that shared and become part of the scientific community after funding. So again, there are reasonable contexts in which you wouldn't share something, and that is a place where you would explain what you're planning to share, how you're planning to share it, and really thinking through how do you make the most of the funding that went into developing that resource. How are you as a researcher going to give that back to the community, and if there are limitations, again, those are allowable, but they need to be contextualized and properly explained.
Thanks very much for that distinction. And so, particularly if you're interested in a clinical trial, you might think about the data on your trial participants as being covered in the data management plan. How are you protecting their identities and the data that you're collecting? If you are going to share that out to other researchers, what's the plan to do that? And then, your underlying software or workflows or other kinds of mechanisms that you're employing that might be in the in the resource sharing plan, so that you're making those available to other people to try out in their context as well. All right, let's talk for just a minute about how your proposal gets evaluated. NIH, just like other federal agencies, has external review panels that have experts in the general area looking at all the proposals and ranking those based upon specific criteria. So for this particular solicitation, we have some of the standard NIH review criteria here at the top around significance of the work, the intellectual merit of that, the investigators' qualifications, what's innovative about the work, what's the approach that you're taking, things like that. What kind of environment are you doing this work within, and the resources that are available to you. So those are all pretty standard, and they're very well defined in the solicitation so that you have a sense of what specifically they're measuring there. But there are also some solicitation specific criteria here at the bottom. Not so many in this particular case in terms of the R25 program that we looked at previously. There were quite a few more around how do you measure your outcomes from your training program and so forth. But in terms of this R1, some of these are applicable if you have a clinical trial or if you have human subjects that you're working with or animals. But the one that is required for all of them is how you're including the broadest number of people within your research from categories that are important to broaden STEM participation. And so there is some guidance about what that particular supplementary document looks like. But anything else, Allison, that we should be thinking about in terms of how these proposals are reviewed in terms of the data science and informatics dimensions?
So I think the biggest question that you did allude to is this question between a resource development and a research question. And I think that's something that comes up a lot, is that there are proposals that propose, building something that is a resource that is useful to the community, that don't really move the bar forward on science or data science methodology. And those things can get reviewed quite well, but they get hung up a little bit when we go to actually make funding, because we're saying it's an R01 program, it's got to be research. So I think that can be a little tough. So that's something I would definitely reach out to a program officer about. I would say under this additional criteria, my understanding is that the inclusion of women, minorities, and individuals across the lifespan, that applies to if you are doing human subjects research, that your human subjects be, as representative as can be. Again, there's opportunity to scientifically justify if you're excluding certain groups, but you would be justifying that. And the expectation is that you would be including as wide a range of people as possible in your research, if you are doing human subjects research. Human subjects research is a little bit tricky to know if you're doing it or not. There are tools on the NIH website that can help you walk through a series of questions if you want to know, is it human subjects or not? You can also reach out to a program officer, but because this is under the review criteria, if you come in and you don't think you're doing human subjects and the review panel looks at your research proposal and sees something where you're doing a survey, that might be an opportunity where they flag it for the program officer to then, I would follow up with you and say, are you really doing human subjects? And there would be an opportunity to take a closer look at that later. But to the extent that you can get it right when you come in the door, that's important. I would say with clinical trials, if you are proposing a clinical trial, you need to get it right. That's one that we can't fix once it comes in the door one way or the other. We can't make the change later. So human subjects, we're a little bit more flexible on, and we hope you get it right, but clinical trials, you really have to do your homework on that one and reach out to a program officer if you're not sure.
Very good. And yeah, some of the human subjects protection is really going to be driven by your home institution, particularly if you're in academia. If you are proposing as a nonprofit or some other type of organization where you don't have an IRB function at your institution, that could be a little tricky. And so how human subjects is defined can be a thorny issue. And so getting some guidance from folks at your institution or from NIH is really important there. So that's some of the positive review criteria. We also had some language in the solicitation that said, this is what some of the things that we want and don't want. And so we have some good guidance about language like the focus of this opportunity is, always look for those signifiers to tell you what people are looking for. But the last one here, if you send in things that are focused on infrastructure, to the detriment of the underlying science, that's not going to be responsive to the solicitation. And so, again, we're finding where that line is important for you, but just know that NIH does see a line there, and they want to see the basic science as well. We do have some language that multidisciplinary teams are expected, and so, if you're concerned about, well, I have a bunch of partners that I want to bring into this. That sounds like that is great here. They're expecting that there's going to be multiple disciplines coming to bear on a particular problem, and so there's going to be a limit on the budget in terms of what you can do in terms of subawards and things like that. But bringing in other people is really important to address the scope of the program. All right, I am just going to wrap up here with a note that we do collect relevant awards, particularly within the Midwest, for the solicitations that we look at. And so Armgard Hawken from the Hub team, who's on the call today, compiles these for us. And so I've pulled out just a couple here to give you a sense of what has been awarded previously and what that range can look like. But we do have a spreadsheet that I'll put in the chat here in a moment that you can check out for other examples. And that can be a really good learning experience if you haven't proposed to an agency before, to take a look at what they have funded that is similar to your concept and get a sense of what that scope and budget and so forth looks like. All right, before we turn it over to questions and discussion, I just did want to mention that this is a monthly webinar series. And so coming up in September and October, we'll be looking at workforce development in the cyber infrastructure space through 2 solicitations from NSF. In September, that will be the cyber training program. And in October, the new Skype program. And so if you have interest or your colleagues have interest in workforce development topics around research data management, feel free to come back for any of those. I am going to stop sharing here in a moment, but I'd like to open it up to general Q&A at this point. I do want to mention that we can't give you specific feedback on your proposal ideas today. You need to reach out directly to a program officer for that. But if you have questions about the details of this program or more generally how to apply to NIH, we'd be happy to talk about some of those. If there are folks on the call who have received NIH funding before and you'd like to give some advice to first-time proposers, that would be fantastic as well. But we can also talk a little bit about opportunities that you all see within the Midwest and beyond to think about collaborations in this space as well. There is an active big data in health community as a part of the hub. I see Ivo Dinoff from the University of Michigan on the call, who is the co-lead for that theme area that we have. And so, thinking about some of the potential opportunities for collaboration in the region here is on the table as well. So I'll stop sharing so we can see each other, but what questions and comments do you all have at this point? Looking at the chat here. So Allison, I see you have some prior awardees that you have recognized in the list there. That's great. Ivo, go ahead and take it away.
John, I was going to say, Allison, thanks very much for the nice overview. This is indeed very useful. And I'm sure, we always struggle with this, right? The exact blend of innovation and the risk involved and how much is, kind of considered too ambitious. It's one of those things where, we oftentimes hear back and forth, right? Do people, this balancing act, I guess, between kind of doing more the secure route of traveling the path that everybody does, right? Kind of marching forward with incremental progress versus the more radical path of where you're charting a new territory. How much appetite for a risk is there, I guess, is what I'm trying to bluntly ask. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely appetite for risk. I think I see it all the time from, review panels that call out when an application is incremental, as you say. That's kind of the fastest way to kill a proposal, is to get that I word mentioned about your proposal. So I think that it does have to be moving the science forward in a new and exciting way, but it also has to be in a way that you can convince your peers that you are the right person, the right team. The time is now. You have the expertise and the availability, and you've thought about the idea far enough that you're likely to succeed. And the R01 program, there's room for risk in the R01 program. I think if you want to come in the door with something wild, R21 is for you. There's also a program offered through the Office of the Director. I'm sorry, the code is DP1. So it's the Director's Pioneer Award. So if you're really thinking about something radical and outside of the box, this is a different funding opportunity that would allow you to really come in the door with a big idea that does not have a great backing in existing science. So that's something you might consider. But for this R01 program that we've been discussing, every single award we make, we're looking for the innovation, and we're really looking for how is this moving the field forward. And I think I've said a little bit about resource development versus the true science. And I think that's what we're looking for, is something that is doing something a little unexpected, a little risky, that we can put money towards to move the field forward. That really is something that we are looking for in every single award we make.
Thank you.
So I think since this is a data science interested crowd, one of the other things that we have seen a lot from NIH are solicitations around analyzing or reanalyzing existing data. I'm looking on our hub website. We have a number of upcoming solicitations, and so there's some through the brain and neuroscience folks. There's some through the genomics data people. What would you say are different about those sort of data focused projects where you're thinking more about analytics versus this project where it seems to me it might be more about workflows and algorithms and things like that?
I'm not sure that there's a direct line. I mean, each institute develops their own funding opportunities kind of independently. So, for NLM, everything we do is data science. I think we have a lot of projects in our portfolio that don't necessarily generate their own data. They really are looking for innovative ways to combine existing resources to make a resource that hasn't been useful for scientific discovery useful for the first time. So we do have a lot of projects on that paradigm in our portfolio that come in through this solicitation. So I can't speak so clearly as to another institute, what would be under their solicitation versus the solicitation, but certainly coming forward with an old data set that you think you can, pull out something really informative using a new AI technique. I mean, that's something that we see a lot, something with, natural language processing. If you can take something that exists in the world and make it relevant for discovering something about health, I think we see a lot of projects and we're excited about that.
I guess related to that, when we're talking about novelty and basic research in data science and informatics, there's a long history of trying to automate curation of data sets, for example, or do literature mining, as you alluded to just now. And so NLM in particular has been one of the main drivers in terms of repositories of data, whether it's going way back to GenBank or whether it's the PubMed corpus that people have done a lot of NLP on over the years. What are you thinking in terms of using existing NIH and NLM resources as sort of the focus of a project and trying to derive something new, based upon a new approach or a new kind of workflow, something like that?
I think that there's a lot of room. I will say, we don't like to see proposals that compete with what we are doing. I mean, I am only in the extramural program, but we don't want to see things that are competing with like the known things that are being built into NCBI. We wouldn't fund a grant that would compete with that process. But in terms of taking what exists through NLM resources and making it more useful, we're seeing a lot of applications in that space and we're excited by it. Certainly large language models have the potential to transform all of biomedical literature into something that is more immediately useful in a way that it hasn't been before. The things that we're most concerned about is how do you tie that into knowledge graphs? How do you tie that into, knowledge, not just language? And bridging that gap is something that we're really keen on investing in. I'll also say that, the errors and understanding, when large language models spit out stuff that isn't factual in the health space is a huge problem. And that's something that we're very interested in looking at, the scientific basis for how do you put guardrails on these types of technologies so that health information is accurate, and how do you combat misinformation with these technologies? That's something that we're very interested in.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that. We just have a few minutes left here, so if you do have questions for the guest, please put them in the chat now or unmute and go ahead and ask those. Anything that you'd like to say, Allison, at the sort of institute level in terms of data science goals or big picture kinds of things? One thing that occurred to me is we've had on this webinar before the NSF and NIH collaboration around data science and genomics, so that sort of joint solicitation approach. Are there interagency programs that we should know about? Are there other sort of institute-wide things that people might be interested in the data science space?
I think, NIH does collaborate with NSF. A program that we are involved in is Smart and Connected Health. So there are a few opportunities for connection with NSF. I think there's also, within Health and Human Services that NIH is a part of, there's some collaboration with AHRQ, which is health quality research. There's, some things like the small business program we collaborate with CDC on. So within HHS, there's, some collaboration. I'll say at the NIH wide level, the Office of Data Science Strategy puts out primarily funding opportunities that would be supplements to existing grants. It's kind of, a tricky way that NIH works is that ODSS can't always give out money for an R01 type program. So they tend to give out money in these supplements, but they've used those supplements very creatively to, take an ongoing NIH project and kind of infuse it with AI expertise or data science expertise in a way that I think is very innovative. So there is that opportunity, I would say, whenever we're developing funding announcements, for some, depending on what it is, we have ICs come together. I recently was part of a funding opportunity that was looking at making the All of Us research cohort data more useful generally. So NLM signed on to that with many other ICs to try to figure out from each IC's perspective, how do we make that resource work better for researchers who come in through our ICs. So obviously our NLM's purview to that was a very broad data science type of a question. So there is some collaboration across ICs, but I think it is at NIH, each institute has its own charge and mission. So you do see a lot of independent work in this space, and NLM really is the home of, disease agnostic research that is, cross-cutting and really building out the infrastructure and the data science methodology to, make health data, health information flow. And, other ICs are more focused on the real disease component of it in a way that we are not.
Absolutely.
I guess I'll say, thank you everyone for your interest in this. I hope that anybody who wants to think through an idea, if it's this opportunity or another one, I'd be happy to field your questions and also put you in contact. If there's another program officer on the team who I think is a better fit for your particular project, I'll put you in connection with them. But thank you for your interest. And, John, I really enjoyed, we write these funding opportunities, and to hear someone on the other side interpreting it so well is encouraging that, it can be taken up and applied to by people in the community. And that's great to hear.
Yeah, I think the statement that I say most often on this call is read the solicitation, and I say it over and over. So you really need to do that to be successful. But thank you very much for being here today, taking the time to speak with us. Really appreciate the insights, and hopefully you'll be hearing from folks in our community about their proposal ideas in the future.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Bye.